And even though I only highlighted the irritability, the agitation, and the brain zaps, I think the overall feeling that I have, I don't know, I just feel less of a quality of a person than I was running Fluvoxamine. And that's just all things considering. It's like the last month I didn't really like who I was. Whereas with post-psychotherapy, Vigorous Steve here. Let's talk about Fluvoxamine withdrawal. I feel it's only fair to make a dedicated video about this topic after I made that video about my personal experience running Fluvoxamine for the majority of 2022. And long story short, I got great results out of running this selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. I didn't really experience too many side effects. But now that I'm off Fluvoxamine, the last month has been pretty rough. I discontinued Fluvoxamine cold turkey, which is not recommended to do. Just like you have to build up Fluvoxamine, you have to taper it downwards to minimize the withdrawal side effects. But I went to the United States and I don't have a script for Fluvoxamine that's valid within the United States. So I went from 100 milligrams before bed to nothing. And I didn't really have time to taper down while I was in the United States. And now that I've been off the compound for about a month in duration, luckily the side effects are dissipating, but there's still some side effects that I would like to discuss with you guys. So you guys can stay informed if you're still undecided about running Fluvoxamine. Basically, long story short, if you thought steroids were a lifetime commitment, well, SSRIs are on a whole another level. Before we get into it, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, consider subscribing if you're new to the Vigorous crew, and check out the Patreon if you want to support this YouTube channel so I can hire an editor and solely focus on making content and don't have to sit through hours and hours and hours of editing, so you guys can have a nicely polished, finished product. All right, let's rewind the clock a little bit. In 2022, I think it was February or March, give or take, I decided to get on Fluvoxamine to help with my OCD tendencies regarding the recording of these YouTube videos. Now, that borderline OCD is actually perfectionism. I want these videos to be perfect. I want myself to be well represented on camera. I don't want to stumble over my words, which I do many times, unfortunately. That's why the recording process usually takes a very long time for me, because I say a sentence for 30 seconds, I mess up, and then I re-record. And that might happen 20 to 30 times over the course of several segments as part of these YouTube videos. So I resorted to Fluvoxamine in an attempt to resolve that issue. Unfortunately, that didn't get resolved, but the overall quality of my life improved substantially. I became a better trader. I became much more manageable regarding my irritability and mood throughout the day. Whereas before, I would be irritable at the smallest things. I think it's part nurture, part nature. My parents are highly irritable for the smallest things, and so is my sister and basically everybody else that I was surrounded with in Holland. So that was one of the reasons why I needed to leave, to see if my irritability was actually nurture or nature, right? Coming from myself internally. And my irritability and agitation at the world, basically, did resolve by an arbitrary number of 50% after moving to Thailand. But that remaining 50%, I was not able to fix until I went on Fluvoxamine. Now, unfortunately, after coming off Fluvoxamine, that irritability and agitation is now slowly returning, but we'll save that a little bit for later to discuss the side effects of the withdrawal period that I'm now undergoing. So going on Fluvoxamine basically resolved that entirely. And that was a huge relief for me, even though that took away my training intensity, because I always used that anger and irritability and agitation to really push the failure and way beyond. So basically, long story short, Fluvoxamine made me a better person, but a worse bodybuilder, because again, you still need to bring a level of intensity to the gym to really exceed and push beyond the boundaries of what is otherwise biologically possible, using a little bit of pharmacology along the way. Now that I'm off Fluvoxamine, I start to notice these little things of myself, which have been gone for almost a year, last year, that I found annoying about myself. That is the irritability, the agitation, the rambling about, trivial things that in the moment feels highly justified. But when you look at it as an observer, my wife, for an example, she just shakes her head and she's like, oh, I can't believe that this guy just keeps going and rambling about this trivial subject. So that's a bit when you realize in that moment that you're rambling for no apparent reason at all, it's just something internally, something wrong with your brain chemistry. And even though it feels right, just like the rambling you would get on Trenbolone, basically, the argumentative rambling that doesn't seem to end. And in that moment, on Tren, it feels so justified. You feel 100% validated and correct, and the whole world is wrong and you're right in that moment. But in reality, your brain is just messed up, and you're making the lives of the people around you kind of miserable. So that's one of the reasons why I discontinued the use of Trenbolone and most of the agitating anabolic androgenic steroids that are on the market 8 years ago on my wife's request, and I haven't touched them since. After going on fluvoxamine, I felt that I had a firm grasp of my emotional state, and the removal of fluvoxamine is almost night and day regarding how I react to particular situations. So I can't wait to get back on fluvoxamine, honestly, but I had to remove it because this year is not about me. It's not about my personal bodybuilding aspirations or my business aspirations. It's about getting my wife pregnant. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that shows that fluvoxamine or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors in general have a negative effect on your fertility. And even though fluvoxamine hasn't been extensively studied like some of the other antidepressants out there, a 2016 rodent study indicated that the long-term treatment of fluvoxamine has a negative effect on overall semen parameters, decreased sperm concentration and motility, while reducing overall morphology. That's an increased amount of abnormal sperm within the semen. Other negative effects on fertility include oxidative stress and apoptosis within the testes, decreased levels of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, as well as testosterone and estrogen levels. Now, I feel the last part is a little bit of a non-issue because even though I'm coming off cycle, I will follow a extensive fertility protocol, including ACG, HMG, perhaps recombinant FSH, and other fertility medications, let's say Clomid or enclomiphene. That still has to be determined. I'm going to start with ACG and HMG and alternate that going forward after I come off cycle. So the decreased FSH, LH, testosterone, and estrogen levels that this rodent study indicates could lead to oxidative stress and apoptosis in the testes because they're basically non-functional because the hypothalamic pituitary signaling to the testes is downregulated or partially shut down. But the decreased sperm concentration, motility, and worsening of the morphology, that is alarming. Now, this is just a rodent study. Unfortunately, fluvoxamine hasn't really had any human studies regarding fertility levels. But when you look at the other SSRIs, like citrulline, for example, or citalopram, paroxetine, escitalopram, and a couple others, in most of the human studies, it shows DNA fragmentation. So that's DNA fragmentation within the semen itself. How are you going to get somebody pregnant when the DNA within the semen is fragmented? So I'm not going to take the risk. So even though the scientific evidence regarding fluvoxamine and its effect on fertility is kind of paper thin, when you look at SSRIs as a whole, I'm simply not going to take that risk. I want the healthiest baby, the healthiest child, leading into adulthood and later on in life that I can possibly produce. So this is the main reason why I'm coming off fluvoxamine. But you can bet both of my testicles that I will reintroduce fluvoxamine after my wife is pregnant and past the first trimester. Now, regarding the topic of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and antidepressants as a whole and their overall negative effect on fertility, that will be a whole video topic that I'm going to drop over the next couple of weeks or months after, and only after, I've run through the other performance-enhancing drugs and their negative or positive effect on fertility overall. That's going to be one of the main overlying arches of this YouTube channel this year, how everything affects your fertility, whether those are the steroids or the supplements or the ancillaries or the peptides, and at one point the SSRIs and other antidepressants. Stay tuned for that. It might still take a while because there's a lot of research that I still need to do, and I would rather address the steroids and the lowest common denominator drugs that we tend to use, basically all of us or the majority of us on this YouTube channel, because those might include a PCT or a lengthy recovery process, whereas with the cessation of fluvoxamine, the semen parameters tend to improve quite substantially and rapidly going forward. So stay tuned for that. Let's talk about the side effects that I'm currently experiencing. They were way worse when I went to America. They started to manifest within 2 or 3 days after stopping fluvoxamine. And I've, in the past, while running fluvoxamine for a couple months at 100 milligrams per day, I might have missed 1 or 2 doses, or I didn't order in time from the pharmacy and I was off fluvoxamine for, let's say, 2 to 3 days. I would say on the 3rd day, I would start to experience side effects already. And it has to do with the half-life. The half-life of fluvoxamine is about 15 to 20 hours, dependent on age and overall metabolic rate. So let's say multiply that 5 times. That means that fluvoxamine is completely metabolized from your body within 3 to 4 days, 5 days at maximum. So I would notice at the 3rd day of discontinuing or missing doses of fluvoxamine that I would start to get some side effects. Now, mostly for me, that was irritability and agitation, but other people that discontinue SSRIs or fluvoxamine after years of continuous use, they might experience dizziness, extreme worry, uneasiness, confusion, headache, tiredness, mood changes, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, pain, burning, numbness, tingling, or electric shock sensations in the hands or feet or brain. The side effects are brutal. So what I experienced mostly from day 3 onwards, guys, I should have been locked up for these 2 or 3 days that I was running 5-HTP in an attempt to increase my serotonin levels. Don't do what I do. I would highly recommend against it. My agitation after the 3 days on 100 milligrams 5-HTP before bed, man, I was intolerable, insufferable. Luckily, my wife reminded of me, saying that, my agitation and irritability was really off the scale and way worse than ever, and asked me if I was on the Tremboloni sandwich. So I took all of the 5-HTP out of my supplement box, and literally the next day, I felt better. So the irritability and agitation is the most common side effect that I'm experiencing now a month later after discontinuing fluvoxamine. But I did have those brain zaps, especially in America. So that's from day 3 to, let's say, day 15, within the first 2 weeks of discontinuing fluvoxamine. I would have those weird brain zaps that, everybody talks about after discontinuing antidepressants. Man, multiple times per day, while talking to people, while being in Disneyland, while talking to people at the Mr. Olympia, while watching the Mr. Olympia. It was highly, highly annoying. It's like somebody turns off the light switch and turns it on, and suddenly you're like, where am I? What am I doing? Oh yeah, I'm talking to somebody. Oh yeah, I'm watching the Mr. Olympia. So hopefully none of you guys noticed that. Hopefully I was able to remain and keep my composure while meeting fans. But sometimes I would just blink out of existence and come right back, not knowing what the hell was going on. So that was quite confusing. I'll go into depth on why that is a little bit later in this video. But the majority of the commonly reported side effects of fluvoxamine, I didn't really experience. I just felt that my overall capacity to control my emotions and my ability to handle certain situations from a anger management perspective went from 100%, right, where you have a maximum anger management capacity, to -10. Yeah, it was not good. I'll be honest, it was not good. Now, you guys don't see the brunt of this, but my wife does, and obviously when I'm in traffic, I'm, a moody SOB, cursing at the sky and howling at the moon and that kind of stuff. Now it's already a lot better after I removed the 5-HTP in an attempt to increase my serotonin levels. But what I should have done, now looking back on the whole affair, is I should have just tapered the drugs slowly over time, so most of these side effects would have never happened. Now, when you look at the graph of fluvoxamine plasma concentrations, serum concentrations, and the amount of SERT occupancy that you get, the serotonin reuptake transporter, more on that later, you see that it goes up quite steeply and then starts to taper off. So that means at higher dosages, you get less SERT occupancy compared to lower dosages. And this seems to be the case for most of the SSRIs and antidepressants. The more you take, the less SERT occupancy you get comparatively to lower dosages. So that means that you have to taper the dose down slowly and allowing your SERT occupancy to come down slowly as well. And this can be done with 10%, 15% reductions. This is what most people that have a lot of experience with SSRI and the withdrawal period recommend. But I stopped cold turkey. So I went from basically 90% SERT occupancy to 0. So what happens is that a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, they block the serotonin reuptake transporter and prevent the reuptake pump from reabsorbing the serotonin. So now there's a lot of serotonin present within the synapses. And then as the serotonin concentrations within the synapses increase, many of the 5-hydroxytryptamine receptors actually downregulate. Now there's many different kinds of 5-HT receptors fulfilling all kinds of physiological functions. The 5-HT1 actually has 5 subtypes, A to F, and then 5-HT2 has 2 subtypes, and the other ones also have subtypes. So there's many different receptors involved in this process. And now these receptors get stimulated and downregulated in different capacities, resulting in the overall beneficial effects that we generally associate with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. But if you phase out the SSRIs, some of these 5-HT receptors upregulate faster than others. And if you discontinue the SSRI abruptly from one day to the next, you're basically creating a tremendous neurotransmitter imbalance. Because again, several 5-HT receptors might upregulate, some of them might still stay downregulated for weeks or months after discontinuing that particular SSRI. And it's different for every different kind of SSRI that's out there. That's why it's generally recommended to phase out these SSRIs over time with 10%, maybe 20% reductions. And some people would be better off phasing from one SSRI into a next one. Now, there's a lot of different protocols that there's no cookie cutter way to really recommend how to phase off SSRIs. I would highly recommend a website called survivingdepressants.org. I'll link it down below. That's basically a talk group where a lot of people come together that used SSRIs for years or decades, or maybe even their entire life, and share their experience on how to phase out and come off particular antidepressants and what they felt was beneficial, what didn't work, what side effects they experienced, how to mitigate some of these side effects. Right? It's a very tight-knit community where people actively share what's working and what's not working. And I think if you want to come off SSRIs, just like I did, you'll find a lot more information there compared to what I can possibly present in this YouTube video. I went through a lot of the threads there regarding fluvoxamine and withdrawal. And basically, long story short, you should taper off and you should give yourself some time. So I didn't taper off. I went cold turkey. And now after about a month or so, I can say that most of the side effects, the brain zaps, the irritability, the anger management, and perhaps sleeping a little bit longer than intended, but that could also be due to the time zone difference. I mean, basically, America is the opposite time zone of Thailand. And when I was there, I was just running around nonstop, meeting fans and doing my holiday stuff. So I didn't really get an opportunity to sleep much there. And then you come back to Thailand, back to a pile of work that needs to be done. So I've been working nonstop, trying to get as much work done as possible while simultaneously dealing with the time zone difference. So you work all day and then you suddenly crash and you sleep for what, maybe 9 to 10, sometimes 12 hours per day. So luckily, all of those side effects for me are slowly phasing out and going away. The irritability and agitation, that's something that I'll just have to manage going forward, just like I managed that for the majority of my life. Let's say from puberty, 13, 15 years old, up until 39 years old when I started experimenting with fluvoxamine, or 38 years old last year. I'll do my best to keep a lid on it and look at the situation objectively before I go into a rambling tangent and make myself intolerable for my wife. It's basically you objectify what's going on. You take a step back. I've gotten quite good at this, now turning close to 40. You look at the situation, you take a step out of the situation, and you look at it as an observer. You turn that situation into a statue, you walk out of it, you look at it objectively, you realize that you're a rambling lunatic, and then you reel that stuff right back in and try to address the situation a little bit more composed. So that's what I've been trying to do for the last couple of weeks now. It was undoable using 5-HTP supplementation, but now that I take a step back from that and discontinued it, it's actually quite easy. So objectively, I try to manage my anger that way, same as you manage the pain during a working set or the difficult issues that might arise during your life. It takes a little bit of mental maturity. And again, I might still get caught in a rambling madness, but I try to keep that to a minimum. Now, how does SSRI withdrawal compare to something like post-psychotherapy or the withdrawal period from certain recreational drugs? Personally, I don't have experience with withdrawal periods of recreational drugs. And even though I dabbled aplenty in my younger years. I never got addicted. So I really don't have any experience with being addicted to alcohol or weed or cocaine or other stimulants or other recreational drugs. I experimented. I enjoyed the time running a particular experiment, and then I would move over to the next experiment and never touch that drug for maybe a year or a couple months or whatever, right? I would alternate my experiments and drugs during that phase of my life, which has now been long since closed. So I do have extensive experience with post-cycle therapy, though. I came off cycle 4 times already, so that's 4 times the experience as fluvoxamine withdrawal. I came off steroids the first time after 16 weeks, second time was 4 or 5 months. Then the third time, one of my more recent PCTs was after taking steroids for a decade. That one was rough, but it was kind of forced because I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and I wanted to get that resolved because I knew I wasn't going to focus on my bodybuilding during that time. So why take steroids if you're not going to be a 100% full-time bodybuilder? So I came off cycle. I was off cycle for 9 months. I resolved the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I rechecked my fertility parameters, which will all be documented when I get to the overall documentation of my fertility parameters in the future. So that all turned out well. That PCT was easier than I thought it would be. And then recently I did a period without steroids and then doing some sort of makeshift PCT with Gorilla Mind Sigma and fake ACG that I had. So that was a bit of a, failed experiment, but still my testosterone levels came back to, what was it? 420 nanograms per deciliter? No pun intended. I haven't touched weed in over a decade. So take your 420 jokes someplace else. Or you can post them in the comment section. Those really help with the algorithm. So by all means, 420 jokes go down below. That was where my levels ended up at, which is not bad after considering I only took Gorilla Mode Sigma for a month without the proper PCT during that time. So out of those 4 post-cycle therapies, I would say that was a much easier thing to endure compared to this last month of fluvoxamine withdrawal. And even though I only highlighted the irritability, the agitation, and the brain zaps, I think the overall feeling that I have, I just feel less of a quality of a person than I was running fluvoxamine. And that's just all things considering. It's like the last month I didn't really like who I was. Whereas with post-cycle therapy, okay, you're tired, your libido goes down, you get fat, you get soft, right? All those trivial little things that have to do with your physique. You walk past the mirror, you look small, tiny, you want to wear a big shirt, even though you live in Thailand and it's way too hot to wear a big shirt. So you're just going to have to expose yourself and the lack of muscularity to the outside world and then, deal with all of the jokes. Are you sick? You have cancer? You got HIV, Steve, or you're so small, right? Blah, 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 blah. After 4 PCTs, I'm kind of used to it. And I always realized that during a PCT, even though the muscularity and then, the bodybuilding shape is going away, I'm still me. I'm still a businessman and a husband and the father of 6 cats, etc. Right? So PCT never really fazed me. I know it might be very, very difficult for some guys out there, but for me, honestly, I'm totally at peace with subclinical testosterone levels. Of course, not for too long, but it just gives me ease of mind. And again, the agitation and irritability and the things I kind of hate about myself, being, born with these genetics, seems to be non-existent. But honestly, for me, having androgen deficiency is just another method to get a long-term vacation from these psychological issues that I was born with, that I've had since childhood, as long as I can remember. So I kind of welcome that period. It really puts my thoughts and emotions back in order. And I was able to get the same thing out of fluvoxamine. That's why I liked it so much and ran it for almost a year straight. But going from having that under control to zero, having no control of those emotions, man, it really made me reconsider my goals. I had a long discussion with my wife a couple days into it. Maybe, babe, I should go back on fluvoxamine. Babe, it's very hard for me to control my agitation and temper tantrums. Babe, should I get back on fluvoxamine and just bite the bullet and taper it off slowly over the next 6 months or so? So I'm lucky. I'm very happy that I persisted through this period. But I think this fluvoxamine withdrawal, the last month was not easy. I'll be honest. It was way worse than PCT. And how does it compare to like horrible periods in your life, like your parents divorcing or getting a broken leg or, man, all the things I don't really want to mention on this YouTube channel? Those are way worse. So in that sense, SSRI withdrawal or fluvoxamine withdrawal is like going to Disneyland. It's a walk in the park compared to really difficult periods in your life. But it was difficult the last month, and I'm sure going forward it's going to be difficult, but easier to cope with, hopefully going forward. So if I seem a little bit off sometimes, that's just the fluvoxamine withdrawal. I've always been off, but not off to that extent. I mean, to be fair, I don't experience any of these horrible side effects that other people on the forums that I read about experience. I mean, that's way worse. Some of the people have withdrawal for months or years, even after tapering fluvoxamine or other SSRIs down slowly with 10% increments and using these little micro dosages by suspending the fluvoxamine or SSRIs in liquid and then coming down with 1 milligram every week or every couple of weeks. What I experienced is, again, a walk in the park compared to what other people experienced. Could be because I'm quite resilient to drug withdrawal. I mean, PCT for me is not a big issue. Coming down of recreational drugs was never really an issue for me years ago. Hangovers I can deal with no problem in the, blue moon that I have a hangover. And even though SSRI withdrawal was, I would say from all the drug experiences that I've had over the last couple of years, was one of the hardest. It's still not as difficult compared to what other people experience. And it's certainly not as difficult as, having your parents divorce when you're 15 years old. So I always keep that in perspective. I look at the situation, how bad I feel now. Could I feel a lot worse? No, I certainly could, right? So, and those periods are luckily behind me, and I'm very thankful that I was able to survive through those periods and build a little bit of character. It might be different for somebody who's not gone through hell and back, so to say, and then have to go through SSRI withdrawal. If that's your first rodeo, then it's going to be rough. I wouldn't recommend this period that I had over the last month onto anybody else. Just keep in mind that you're not the only one who's going through this withdrawal period. There's hundreds, if not thousands of people out there that share their experiences on several of these forums, one of which I'll link down below. So if you need some help, please go there, right? Because every situation is unique. Every situation will require a particular approach. I'm just here sharing my experiences. So if you need some guidance along the way, please go to those forums and discuss it with people there who are also going through that period that is lasting, weeks or months or years for them as well. Just keep in mind that slowly with time, it does get better. So that's something you have to realize, right? Every period in your life is going to be temporary. Some of those are going to be filled with extreme highs. And unfortunately, as nature is cruel, you're also going to go through periods that are going to be filled with extreme lows. You build a lot of character along the way, as I am doing right now, because my anger management compared to 2 weeks ago now is certainly a lot better. So I'll leave it here. That's enough rambling from me. Thank you guys so much. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the YouTube description. My sponsors, my affiliates, how to get into contact with me for consultations, the ebooks that I have on my website, and now also the Patreon account so I can hire an editor and I can spend a little bit more time making content and less time editing these videos together with this perfectionism and OCD tendencies that I have in the back of my head. Frame perfect editing, it's Steve, it's not a speed run, bro. I keep telling this all the freaking time. You don't have to do frame perfect jumps or editing on YouTube. And yet, while I'm editing, that's exactly what's happening. So hopefully we can leave that up to the editor and then focus on content and, increase the production value of this YouTube channel for your guys' enjoyment. And for the Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys. Thank God fluvoxamine withdrawal doesn't affect your gains. But if it did, it would certainly be a lot tougher. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.